watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following, and by viewers like you.
Hello, I'm Mark Golub, and there continues to be, throughout the Jewish world, enormous concern and discussion about the pressures being put on the State of Israel by the United States to engage in peace negotiations with the Palestinians and to implement the precondition of a total settlement freeze. There is also deep fear among many in the American Jewish community about the relationship between President Obama and the administration itself and the Netanyahu government and the State of Israel. How real are the charges that Obama has betrayed and abandoned the State of Israel, is discriminating against the State of Israel, and has moved away from the traditional U.S. commitment to Israel? Well, lucky us. We are fortunate to be joined now by two individuals who each have strong feelings and keen insights into all of these issues, though they approach them from very different perspectives of left and right. My guests are, on the left, Ralph Seliger, the editor of Israel Horizons, and Ralph has deep ties to Israel. Half of his relatives are living in Israel. He go back 3 generations. And Ralph Seliger has been involved in Zionist organizations for the past nearly 30 years. You may have seen his writings, among other places, in The Forward and in Tikkun magazine. And Ralph Seliger, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
And on the right, a man who you've met before, Izzy Leibler, who writes a weekly column for the Jerusalem Post. He is a former chairman of the governing board of the World Jewish Congress and currently is the chairman of the Diaspora-Israel Relations Committee of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. And if you've seen Izzy sit with us before, you know that before he and his wife made Aliyah, for many, many years, Izzy Leibler did extraordinary work leading the Jewish community of Australia. And Izzy, it's wonderful to welcome you back as well. Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you again, Mark.
Thank you. So Izzy, I want to begin with you because you have written a piece most recently saying, despite strong ongoing support for Israel by the American people, the U.S.-Israel relationship has been on a downward spiral since the election of the new administration. So I want your assessment now of what really bothers you. What is it that bothers you, Izzy, about President Obama and his administration's approach to U.S.-Israeli relations?
Well, until the last couple of months, I would have said the jury's still out. But
which is what you said last time we spoke.
But in the light of what has happened, I regret to say that as things stand now, I think it's indisputable that President Obama seems to have an axe to grind with the present government of Israel and is treating Israel in a manner which contrasts with that of all of these predecessors. And there have been plenty of times when the Israeli government and the American government have had differences, but never like this. And if I can be a little bit more specific, it reflects itself in a number of ways. First of all, there's a policy of engagement which President Obama has undertaken in relation to Arab countries, extremist Arab countries, and even rogue states. And I think that has failed, but it is a policy which has been engaged. At the same time, he seems to have adopted a policy in relation to Israel, which is the very opposite. Instead of engaging, the one country which I think few people would argue have over the last 20 years been desperately seeking peace and making compromise and making commitments, he seems to have adopted a position whereby he feels he has to distance the United States from Israel. And some of us fear now that the price of appeasement, as I see it, of the Arab world seems to be an approach whereby Israel can be sacrificed. And
In what
this-
way sacrifice? What does that
Sacrificed in the context of being distanced from the United States, being treated in a manner differently than the Arabs are being treated. I mean, if you look at the pressures that have been exerted against Israel and look at the pressures which have been exerted against Abbas, there's just no parallel whatsoever. If you look at the compromises that Netanyahu, who has surprised many people in Israel, if I may say so, even including myself, he is the first prime minister to have introduced a settlement freeze that even dovish prime ministers before him would never have dared contemplate. He has done everything possible because I think he appreciates the need of Israel to maintain the alliance with the United States. And in return for this, he's been treated in a manner which is unbefitting any prime minister, and in a manner which I think, if I can take it further, he's been treated worse than a rogue state prime minister. He's been treated, Gaddafi and other people have been treated better.
I want you to tell me specifics. What has happened? What has Obama done specifically vis-a-vis Netanyahu that you say he's treating him worse than, for example, a Gaddafi?
Well, there are certain social requirements that are extended towards any prime minister that comes to this country. I don't think that any prime minister that has come to this country or any head of state has been treated as shabbily as Netanyahu has. And on top
And
of that,
how was he treated shabbily? What happened?
he was treated like a pariah. He was not enabled to make a press statement. He was taken in and hectored, and he was to a very large extent, ambushed. He went through a situation where, because of a bureaucratic blunder, a mistake had been made in terms of timing of an announcement.
But you're talking about his visit to the White House, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know for a fact these things happened?
Well, I have been told by people who claim to know for a fact that it has happened. I certainly know that the leaks that came from the US administration did come from the American administration, and they were very negative.
Okay. So what I understand is there was no photographs were permitted to be taken with him and Obama. That Obama basically left him alone and went to eat with his family, and that ultimately Netanyahu had to leave through the back door or the back, whatever, the back egress to the White House, and that this is not typically how you treat a head of state. Is there anything I've missed?
Well, the more important things are the demands that were extended towards him. There were a list of demands made to him after he'd already made substantial concessions, which were mind-boggling to the extent that they were made and then leaked to the public.
Okay. You know Netanyahu has repeatedly said, both on American television and on Israeli television, the press has made much too much of this. Is he simply trying to be a politician, or do you feel much too much was made of this?
I think that Netanyahu is desperately trying to minimize what took place and understate it. But the people of Israel are very clear in their minds of what took place, and his government and people very close to him are very clear.
Okay, one last question. You used the word sacrifice. You don't want Israel to be sacrificed. In your worst imagination, what's the worst thing that could happen as a result of the Obama administration's attitude towards Israel?
That Israel is forced to give up the concept of defensible borders, goes back to 1967 without any reciprocity, that security is not a prerequisite, and that the Arabs don't give anything back in return as concessions. And this is the way which is heading in the context of what could well be an imposed solution on the part of Obama.
And Israel would just roll over, Netanyahu and Israel would just roll over and say, okay?
They wouldn't roll over, but it would be extremely difficult, and it would lead to a rupture of relations, and we are not a superpower. Israel is not a superpower. Israel is a very strong force, an independent country, not a vassal, but to take on the United States would be a catastrophe, and I think that's understood and recognized by Israelis, and that's why, even at this late stage, despite what's happened, all of us are praying that we can still find a solution and that somehow or other the relationship will get back to square one.
Okay, so Ralph, you've heard some of the concerns that Izzy expresses, and he's expressing things I hear now all the time. What's your sense?
I think this whole brouhaha is really exaggerated. And I think when you look historically, there are several times when relations between Israel and the U.S. Were quite cold. The time during the Suez Crisis in 1956, when President Eisenhower was livid at Israel for its alliance with Britain and France in the attack on Egypt. And during the time of Bush Sr.'s presidency, when Secretary of State Baker basically washed his hands in public in an insulting sort of way. You know, if the Israelis and if the sides want peace, they know my number.
From Clinton on,
Yeah.
has there been this kind of rupture?
From Clinton on, probably not.
Clinton, Bush too, basically seemed to be much closer to Israel than Obama is now. That's the perception among American Jewry. Do you think American Jews get it wrong?
Well, I think the question you have to ask yourself is the Obama administration really hostile to Israel? Does it really not have Israel's best interests at heart?
No,
And
that's not. I'm happy to discuss that, but I want you to answer my question first. Is there a difference? You can discuss why there may be a difference, but it seems to me to be very difficult for anybody, any Jew, to argue whether you're left or right, whether you love Obama, you don't love Obama. There seems to definitely be a difference in the way the Obama administration is dealing with the Middle East, with the Arab world, and with the State of Israel, from certainly Bush II and Clinton, and I would suggest there is a difference in quality, even between the way Obama is handling Israel and Bush I, and I would have a hard time finding, I don't want to go back to Eisenhower. Most of our audience doesn't even know the 56 situation. But in terms of the recent post-67 world that Israel has dealt with, post-73, ever since Nixon sent in the arms to help Israel fight the 73 war, there's been a sense that Israel has the support of the United States in an unwavering sense. And there are many now, left and right, who, whether they agree or not, do see the difference in the way the Obama administration is dealing with the Muslim world and the State of Israel. Right. And you can argue it's a good change, but I find it difficult to believe you don't see the change.
I think that somebody like myself and the half or more of American Jewry who see things as closer to the way I see things, I think we've been looking for a more activist American diplomatic presence in terms of peacemaking than we saw during the last Bush administration.
Okay.
And
you see a change now in that regard?
I do, and I think before we go all half-cocked about this current administration, I think we should realize that what precipitated most of this noise was Vice President Biden being ambushed. We use that term ambushed regarding Prime Minister Netanyahu, but Vice President Biden was ambushed. He felt ambushed when an announcement was made for the 1,600 units in Ramat Shlomo.
A municipal
now,
bureaucrat.
I understand.
Good.
Israel's
And he apologized. And Netanyahu apologized.
Israel's planning apparatus and who has authority where is really chaotic. I mean, Israel has a very dysfunctional kind of government when you have either by a municipal initiative or an initiative of another minister, and I think it was an initiative of another minister, to make such a politically sensitive kind of announced at that time. I think you see how dysfunctional the Israeli government is.
But that's not. By the way, I'd love to do a program later on the dysfunctionality of many things in this world, including the Israeli government. But that's not the issue here. the issue here is, and again, I think you've said yes to me, that you do see a difference in the Obama administration's way of dealing with the Middle East, but it pleases you.
Well, I hate to see the tension. I don't like seeing this kind of discussion because I think at bottom the Obama administration is not hostile toward Israel. And I think the United States remains a steadfast friend of Israel.
That's a critical point. Okay, so Ralph says to you,
Yes.
no matter what, Obama isn't hostile to Israel. And again, when you say to me you're worried about Israel being sacrificed, to me, it's absolutely inconceivable that the state of Israel would ever permit itself to be in a position where it would have to accept an imposed peace solution that would jeopardize its security. I don't believe in a million years that can ever happen. But the question that Ralph has raised, which I want you to address, is, do you really feel the word hostile is appropriate in describing the Obama relationship to Israel?
Unfortunately, the events of the last 4 weeks, unless they're an aberration, and there's already a few steps backwards, and I hope it is an aberration, but the events of the last 4 months can only be described as hostile because no other state has been treated in this way. And I think, Ralph, you'll have to agree on one thing. He made certain commitments, President Obama, on the basis of which 78% of the Jews of the United States voted for him. You can't say that he's abided by those commitments. He's breached those commitments. And when he demands that Israel stop settlements in Jewish suburbs of East Jerusalem, I think that, this is really an enormous step forward that I don't think any administration would ever have contemplated. There was even an understanding with the Bush administration that in those settlements that are going to stay part of Israel, their limited activity will take place. And there was a gentleman's agreement that it should not be expanded in other areas. Now, he's revoked that. He's ignored that. But the concentration, I mean, you've been to Israel recently. You know where Gilo is. You know where French Hill is. These are places which this government of the United States describes as settlements. That, to me, is an obscenity. It's an obscenity to describe Jewish suburbs of Jerusalem, which are 100% Jewish, where no Arabs have been in any way pushed out, to describe those as settlements and to demand that we stop ordinary activity there. I'm sure you'd agree with me in your heart of hearts that this is over the top.
I think there has to be a recognition that according to international standards, they are settlements. I understand that these are neighborhoods of Jerusalem. That's how they've been established. They were established across the Green Line of the 1967 borders.
Do you consider them settlements?
I consider them neighborhoods of Jerusalem,
Right.
but I also do understand why most of the world would consider them settlements.
Okay.
And
did the Bush administration consider them to be settlements?
I think that United States governments have consistently regarded building over the Green Line as settlements.
I'm surprised at you. I'm surprised now. It seems to me the answer is a simple no. The Bush administration, the Clinton administration, they made a distinction. Yeah. Both of those administrations made a distinction between settlements that are inherently in West Bank territory and suburbs of Jerusalem. I don't think that's questionable. So I'm surprised that you would say that.
What you have to understand is most of what we regard as East Jerusalem today was West Bank territory.
Absolutely. And also in 1980,
it was not part of Jerusalem.
In 1980, it became part of Jerusalem. And all I'm saying is, you're not wrong. You're not wrong technically.
Without any international endorsement, without the support of a single country.
But de facto, the United States has treated the suburbs of Jerusalem as if they are different than Kiryat Arba or other settlements in the West Bank.
I think when you come down to it, and I think if, God willing, we will actually have a peace agreement at some time that ends this thing, that there is an understanding even among people in the Palestinian Authority that Israel is not going to roll back these neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, that they will be part of Israel. And that's what Clinton endorsed as the you know.
May I draw your attention to one thing? The Palestinians at no stage ever called for a settlement freeze. When they did, they would never have even contemplated talking about those Jewish suburbs of Jerusalem which were accepted. It was only when the Obama administration took this that our friend Abbas could not become more Zionist than the American administration itself and turned in the way that they did. You have a president of the United States who has created a situation where the intransigency of the Palestinians has become unbearable at a time when Israel was desperately trying to move forward and to try to come to an accommodation. And you'll find that in Israel, and if you've been in Israel, you'll know that what I'm saying is the truth, the overwhelming majority of the public today support Netanyahu on his policy in relation to these things. And if there was a vote taken with the opposition, 90% of the Kadima people would go along with him on board on this, because they know that if they were in government, they have to behave exactly the same way as any other government would. And if there was a Labour government in office today, they too would behave in the same way, because there is a consensus. The two extremes have been kind of moved aside, and Netanyahu, to his credit, has moved Israel to a centrist position. Yet this Obama administration has been trying to bring about regime change there possibly more vigorously than they have in Iran.
Look, I understand that there is an Israeli consensus, and we around this table understand the nature of the neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, but there's also something else that's going on at the same time. There are extremist settlers who are moving into Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. There are people who are very active there now, trying to prevent any kind of compromise within Jerusalem, such as was contemplated during the Camp David and Taba summit conferences, and something which
were rejected by the Palestinians as insufficient.
Which we have to come back to, which the Palestinians, I mean, the notion that the Palestinians will not will be excluded from Jerusalem somehow, that there can be a peace settlement without some sort of Palestinian presence within East Jerusalem, is totally unrealistic.
I don't think that there's a real argument about this. There's an argument about dividing Jerusalem, but giving Arabs and Palestinians an opportunity within Jerusalem, I think you'll find that if we come to a peace settlement, there's a great consensus that would accommodate to that, but not dividing the city.
Well,
we're not setting up another Berlin in Jerusalem.
All right. Well, Netanyahu seems to go back and forth over this a little bit.
Consistent. He's been pretty consistent.
No, he has said, look, Jerusalem will be united forever. It's ours. It's our capital.
It should be united forever.
Okay, I want to understand this better, and now we'll move away from Obama and now talk about the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. You know, Brzezinski wrote a piece with Stephen Solars, where he said Netanyahu would rather have no peace and a united Jerusalem than peace with a divided Jerusalem. First of all, I want to know the extent to which that represents your sentiment, and I want to say to you that it is not my sense of the Israeli people's sentiment. My sense has been that if there were real peace, and you and I have discussed this before, real peace means not fuzzy, but that no child is ever in danger again from a Palestinian. That the two live side by side without war, without fighting. Okay. That if there were real peace, the people of Israel would be willing to permit a piece of what is now called East Jerusalem, which Israel considers to be one united Jerusalem. Israelis don't use the term East Jerusalem in the sense that Americans use it, but that some part of East Jerusalem would be permitted to be the capital of a Palestinian state. They let the Palestinian flag fly on the Temple Mount as long as, in fact, there was real peace. Now I'm asking Izzy Leibler, for real peace, do you think, A, I'm right about the Israeli sentiment, and what do you say? Would you rather no peace in a united Jerusalem? Is that really Netanyahu's view? Or for a real peace, can we give up some of what has become now united Jerusalem and let them have their capital and be happy and live in peace?
Mark, if that was the issue over peace and war, I think you'd find that most Israelis would find a form of accommodation of one way or another with the Palestinians here.
And what the
What you have
accommodation
to-
is, lop off a piece of East Jerusalem and let it be their capital.
I don't know if they'd lop it off, but they'd find a solution whereby they would be able to make use
And
of
the
their
Palestinians
area.
would
The
accept it?
Palestinian- Well, the Palestinians, the big question mark about the Palestinians is what they would accept. Because I don't believe that this Palestinian Authority is necessarily a peace partner. I don't accept
I understand that,
fact-
but that's not my question.
I'm saying-
I want you to assume that they are.
Well-
Assume that everything else is workoutable. And they say to you, you can have it all. We'll
Then we'd
give
fi-
up.
we
We'll
would
give
fi-
up the right of return. We will accept, which seems to me to be almost an unfathomable
Then we'd
concept.
find a
a
solution.
demil-
Find a solution,
I'm
yes.
telling no. The solution is Izzy Leibler says a piece of East Jerusalem is no longer under Israeli sovereignty. Can you live with that?
No, not if you say sovereignty.
You can't live with
You
it.
can-
You
I can
would
live
rather
with-
not have peace.
No, you're putting me in a very difficult position, and you're entitled to do so. But I must say to you, if we had peace in the offing, there's a lot that we would be willing to do.
But
And
not you.
Jerusalem-
But you
and
will
Jerusalem-
not give
but
up
I
a piece
would-
of Jerusalem.
Look, I would not be willing to see the city divided, because that is a formula not for peace, that's a formula for war.
Why?
In the future.
Why?
Because we have learnt one thing. I knew Yitzhak Rabin, and I went along with the Oslo Accords because I believed that the concept of peace for territory was realistic. What we've got now is not peace for territory. All we've received is we've given territory and
I
we've
understand, but
received
you're not
terror.
playing my game. I understand the problem. We can come back to that. You're correct.
And we've given up Gaza
I
and we got
understand
terror.
that. I
So I'm not
understand
going to
all
give
of
up
it.
Jerusalem
I
and be
understand it.
sniped in my home.
No, but if you're going to be sniped in your home, there's no peace to begin with. So you're not talking about my precondition here. I'm creating a scenario where there'll be real peace, no sniping. But you're saying to me, I don't care if there's no sniping. Gosh darn it, you can't have a peace in Jerusalem. And I don't. Boy, I don't believe you represent the Israeli people.
No, I think the Israeli people would be willing to make a compromise on Jerusalem.
And compromise means lop off.
I don't know what it means.
Lop off
well,
a
you
piece.
say it means that. I don't necessarily see a city being divided in
Brzezinski
half.
is right.
But I do
Brzezinski
see,
is right.
No.
You can't have it both
I see
ways,
a
is he?
You can have it both ways. I see a situation where the Palestinians could even occupy part of Jerusalem as their
That's not
capital.
enough for them.
Well, I
They
cannot.
say the following. They say, I'm the
would
Palestinians. I will make peace with you. I will give up the right of return. I will accept the notion of a demilitarized state. Why, I'll never know. I will give up the right to demilitarized state. But there's one thing I want. I want my capital in East Jerusalem, and I want my flag to fly over it. Is it a deal?
I'm sure that
Is it a deal?
I'm sure the flag could fly over it.
What do you say, Mal?
The flag could certainly fly over it.
I can't get Izzy to agree with me.
Well, this is critical, that Israel has to be willing to concede that measure of sovereignty, whatever that means. And of course, you have to work out what that means.
I know what it means. You know what it means.
No, it's not so simple. You don't chop a city up in half.
Well,
Why not?
Because we've learned that cities chopped up in half is a prescription for disaster. The world is moving away from that, not towards it.
I would like to dispute a notion that Jerusalem is a united city. Jerusalem is not a united city. We have approximately 1/3 of the citizens of Jerusalem who do not see themselves a part of the Jerusalem municipality, who have refused Israeli citizenship, do not vote in Israeli elections for mayor, let alone, of course, for
But that's all their
government.
choice. That's their choice.
These and you have a large part of Jerusalem where regular municipal services do not go. You can go to
All this is addressable. It
Of
doesn't-
course, it's
doesn't-
addressable.
That's not the
but,
issue.
But,
That's right. It's
but
not the issue.
But Jerusalem is not really a united capital.
Oh,
at this
you
point.
understand?
I wish we could-
You understand? It's like you're saying to me, in the 1980s, Harlem wasn't part of New York.
Yes, exactly.
Because Harlem, the people in Harlem basically felt disenfranchised and didn't have the same services. Harlem was part of New York. East Jerusalem is part of Jerusalem. The state of Israel considers it to be an entire city. The Jewish, you know, by the way, Ralph, when a Jewish family visits Jerusalem and they stay at the Inbal, and they walk down King David Street, cross the street, go through the Jaffa Gate, and they walk through the old city to the Western Wall, it never occurs to them they're on the West Bank.
Right.
No Jew thinks of the old city as the West Bank.
And
And there is West Bank,
Right.
but the old city isn't there anymore. We have moved on. And the fact of the matter is that the settlements around Jerusalem that are Jewish are part of Jerusalem.
And I think for the
and-
most part, the Palestinians
okay,
have moved
and
on as well.
I wish that
maybe,
was true.
Maybe,
I wish
maybe.
that was true.
But
There's no evidence for that. I wish it was true.
I think Izzy is not giving the Israeli people enough credit, and I think he is committed for his own passionate reasons to keeping all of Jerusalem. Well, the fact of the matter is, cities have borders drawn all the time. Much of what is now new, united Jerusalem was never part of Jerusalem, was not part of the Jerusalem that the Israelis took in 1967. The government continued to extend the border. Okay, so
Mark.
at some point, let's cut the border, give them their own.
Mark.
My problem is, I don't believe we'll ever get there.
No,
but if we could get there,
I was going to
the
say,
capital
Mark,
isn't the place to make the issue.
I'm going to concede to one thing. If we got there, whatever my views were, or your views were, the people of Israel
I
would
agree.
make a concession.
I
there.
agree.
And that's
I agree.
that's the
okay.
that's
So
the
I want to
reality.
ask the bigger question of both
Yeah.
of you. Ralph, is there a Palestinian population today that seriously wants peace with Israel? And by peace, I mean the Palestinian no longer says, it's not about the West Bank, it's about Tel Aviv and Jaffa, and I want Jaffa back. No, I'm moving on. Jaffa, let alone Tel Aviv, is now Israel, and it does not occur to me that I still want it. I'm going to live side by side with the Jewish state of Israel. Do you believe there is a significant Palestinian population that feels that way?
I think that polling data has consistently said more or less that.
And you're comfortable with that?
Yes.
My polling data says the very opposite. I don't know where yours comes from, but I've seen the very opposite. The majority of them are in favour of suicide bombings, even to this day when it's no longer as applicable as it was before. The majority of them say that there should not be a Jewish state, and the majority of them will not recognise Israel as a Jewish state. So I don't know where your polls come from.
David Makovsky of the Washington Institute has published polls that he says argues for Ralph's position.
Well, I've seen other polls, but polls are polls. I guess it
And-
depends
and
a
I-
lot how the question is
And
put.
I think
Yeah.
many Palestinians hold all of these views, as contradictory as they may seem, at the same time. I think that Palestinians, unfortunately, most of them, certainly many of them, still regard terrorism as legitimate resistance. At the same time, they prefer a peace agreement where they can get on with their lives.
And where Israel stays a Jewish state.
Where
You have to
there's-
say immediately yes to me.
Well, unfortunately, Abbas won't say yes immediately.
We'll get to Abbas in a minute.
But I think de facto Israel's going to remain a Jewish state regardless.
No.
I want to know whether the Palestinian people say in their heart, let's live side by side with a Jewish state of Israel.
I
And
think
if you can't say yes to me,
I think that they will. I think that they will agree to the fact. I don't think
okay,
that they'll.
a living reality they'll accept.
Right,
yes.
Okay.
yes.
Now, will Abbas do the same thing? Will the Palestinian leadership? If I was fortunate enough to be sitting with Abbas right now, and he was telling me what was in his heart from your perspective, would Abbas say to me, "Look, I may have trouble getting it, but my goal is to convince the Palestinian people and to create a situation where my people, the Palestinian people, will live in peace with a Jewish state of Israel forever after."
I believe that is his understanding. I think that for whatever reason,
He keeps it quiet.
It's been hard for him to say
Why
it in
has it
so
been
many
hard?
words.
Why has it been hard? This is
Look,
very important to
Look,
me. Why is it hard?
The Palestinian society is really divided in a way that looks that makes Israeli divisions look like a joke.
Yes.
Not divided in the schools. In the schools, they're taught to hate quite nicely.
I think
very effectively.
What you're looking at are old Jordanian and Egyptian textbooks.
But they're
which
still
I'm
used.
looking at
They're still there?
No,
I'm looking at
the
PA
Palestinian
television and PA schools.
Well, look, I can't vouch for PA television. My understanding is that the textbooks were changed.
My understanding is they were supposed to be changed and never have been
that,
changed.
that they were changed.
Never been changed.
No, we've published on this.
Well, you'll bring
the
some
text-
into me.
No, I'll tell you what the textbooks have done.
But let's go beyond that.
Yeah.
We come back to my original question. I said to you, would Abbas be willing to say we'll live in peace? And you said, it's a hard thing for him to say.
I think it's a chip. I think he sees it as a chip to put down on the bargaining table.
Wow.
Why?
In the same way that Israelis for generations have seen the settlements and the territories as a chip, or the territories as a chip
But there's
in the bargaining.
See, here's my attitude, and you both can respond to it. There would seem to be such an overwhelming gain to both sides.
Absolutely.
If there really was peace. Such an overwhelming gain that if Abbas wanted peace, there's not a reason in the world why he isn't tomorrow at a table with Netanyahu.
Well, there is a reason in the world.
Tell me.
I mean, it has to do with the division with Hamas.
But then he doesn't have the power to deliver, does
Exactly.
He has the power to come to an agreement.
With whom?
And I've been with the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and I've really been very much in favor of the kind of shelf agreement that former Prime Minister Olmert was talking about. And I very much wish that the Palestinians had signed on the.
Explain the shelf agreement.
The idea would be basically to decide the major issues, borders, Jerusalem, settlements, refugees, to come to an agreement that both sides can live with, and with the understanding that as long as Hamas holds reign in the Gaza Strip, that you cannot have full implementation of such an agreement.
97% of the territories were offered back by Olmert, and he rejected it.
And I think it's a pity. I
That he
think
rejected
it's a pity
He
that
missed the chance.
I think it's a pity that there wasn't an agreement at Camp David or
Right.
at Taba.
Right.
At Taba, incidentally, it was Barak who walked out. But
That's not my understanding.
no, it is. Look,
my understanding.
what happened
Barak
was
said you get him 97%,
Yes.
and at the last moment,
no.
Arafat says, but there has to be a return.
Yes.
no. You're talking about Camp David.
Yes.
And I'm talking about Taba.
Oh, no.
And
Taba was already the
and
government. There was no government left.
And
There was no
Taba
government.
was
There was
too
no
late.
Israeli government.
fine.
Taba was
Okay.
too late, but it was
Okay.
actually technically Barak who walked out, as opposed to actually having an agreement where he could say, I've actually got an agreement here, so think again if you're going to be voting for Ariel Sharon.
Okay, I want to understand again from your perspective, because part of my problem is that instinctively, I, as an American liberal Jew, want to see the two-state solution. I wanted to see the two-state solution, by the way, not because I believe it addresses a demographic issue, which is the typical reason you hear. I have told Izzy, and I've told other people before, my understanding is all it is delay a demographic problem that could occur among the Israeli-Palestinian population living inside the Green Line. But be that as it may, I'm in favor of the two-state solution because I believe it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
That basically in 48, the Jewish world said, we accept the notion of sharing the land. Therefore, even if there was no demographic issue, I believe it's the right thing to do. And I believe that the Jewish instinct is to say, it'll bring us peace, and it's the right thing to do. And so that's my instinct. Then I say to myself, I love talking to somebody who's on the left, because my problem is that every time I want to be as embracing as I can be, it seems to me I run up against a Palestinian world which really has another agenda. That, in fact, I am not dealing with people who really want to say, we accept your right to live as a Jewish state. So now you are somebody who represents that position. Do you believe that the Palestinian state could be created that would accept the notion, would Abbas and the Palestinians accept the notion of being demilitarized?
I certainly hope so. I don't think they would give up the security forces that they have now.
Nobody's asking them to do that.
I think
Nobody's asking them to do that.
there has to be an understanding that they will not have offensive weapons.
They will not have an army.
They will not.
They
Yeah.
may have a police force, but no army.
Well, they have a pretty heavy
What
duty.
does demilitarized mean to you?
That they are in a situation where the Israeli army can intervene immediately if there is any danger of external forces coming in, and they cannot build up an offensive army internally in conjunction with Iran or the other people that are so
They would not
determined
have
to go.
tanks, they
Would
would not
Palest-
have
the Pal-
aircraft,
and-
they would not have long-range
And
artillery.
your sense is the Palestinians would agree to that?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm so glad. I hope you get your message through to them. 'Cause
Well,
it'd
you
very
may be
good if
right.
you can.
My instinct is
I'm
that
being
would
very
be-
supercilious. Because there's no way they
I do not.
now.
I do not think there could be an agreement otherwise, and I think they understand that.
So we're on the same. We're on the
Okay,
same
now
wavelength.
how about would there be a Palestinian state which would accept the notion that as much as they have wanted a right of refugees to return, it's not practical and they instead will accept financial compensation?
I think that can happen. Yes.
Okay. So you think...
I don't think it's easy for them, but I think yes. And of course, they must concede that as well. I mean, otherwise there cannot be an agreement.
We agree. Unless the Palestinians are willing to say that, Israel will never say, okay.
Nor should they.
Nor should they. That's
Kol
interesting.
hakavod.
That's
Good for
interesting
you.
for them to say.
Yes.
Okay. And we've already discussed Jerusalem. I have a different view of it than Izzy does. And your view of Jerusalem is they should have the right to fly a flag, or do you want to see some part of Jerusalem actually created inside this new Palestinian state?
I don't think the Palestinians would accept an agreement without something like that in Jerusalem, really having a piece of territory.
Okay.
I'll go even a bit further and I'll say this. Today in Israel, we have the greatest consensus we've ever achieved. The people on the extreme left have been marginalized. They're down to next to zero. The people on the extreme right have been marginalized. Most people recognize that what they want today is not to rule over Palestinians, to divide the country, and 2 states for 2 people, if they can do it within the framework of security. At this stage of the game, there is no guarantee of anything, because the big question mark that is in my mind, and I must confess, I don't at this stage think that Mahmoud Abbas is a genuine peace partner, because if he's a genuine peace partner and if he's a leader, he's got an obligation of leading his people. It's not good enough to speak with a forked tongue, to babble about peace when he sees President Obama, and then to go and have celebrations for the martyrs and to pay out great pensions to all the families of those people who blew up Israelis, and to participate in ceremonies where they celebrate martyrdom of having killed Israelis. This, to me, is not a peace partner. And I don't understand how the American administration can talk about them as a peace partner without really getting tough with them when it comes to the issue of incitement. And I want to say to you also, Ralph, I think you've put a very reasonable position forward. But I would say to you, even in East Jerusalem where Arabs are living, surely there's nothing wrong, I'm not talking now about evicting, but there's surely nothing wrong in a Jew living amongst Arabs. We have 20% of our community is made up of Arabs. They live with us. Now, when the time comes, surely Jews that want to stay in and under Palestinian sovereignty should be entitled to stay in places that may become part of Palestinian sovereignty. And I'm sure that you'd agree with me. We go along on this.
Sure.
But this mob that we're dealing with now, they'll cut their throats as things are today if they stayed behind. There's a long way to go before we can talk about living in peaceful coexistence. I've got grandchildren in Israel going into the army. The dream of all of us, from right to left, is peace, peace, peace. But we've learned that to give up territory in return for peace without some sort of commitment and reciprocity on the other side, it's a formula not for peace, but a formula for disaster.
Out of curiosity, how left is he?
He's not left. He's Zionist, moderate, and he reminds me of an old Labour Zionist, a dying breed, but a lovely people, and I wish there were more of them in Israel, and certainly more of them here in Israel. And I wish the J Street people were of his caliber. It would be a much healthier situation here in the United States.
How do you define yourself?
Well, I'm moderately left of center. I'm basically more of a liberal than a leftist. You know.
Yep.
And what happens when you talk to Jews who you respect who are to your left? What's the argument you hear?
Well, I guess I wind up being a little bit more defensive about Israel than they're used to. It depends on how far left they are and how anti-Israel they might be. And certainly if they're really very anti-Israel, they're going to wind up arguing against a pro-Israel voice, against a Zionist voice.
Gentlemen, this has been thrilling for me. I have enormous regard and affection now for both of you. This is our first meeting, Ralph, but you articulate very, very beautifully, and you're very patient with me. You let me push you, and I appreciate it. And I hope this is only the first of many times that you are able to sit at a table with me. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Delighted.
And Izzy, you're one of my favorite people in the world. I happen to think that even if we disagree at times, you bring a passion for the Jewish people, an intelligence about issues. I love what you write. And again, it's not about whether I agree with you all the time or not. But every Jew should be as committed and passionate about their Jewishness and about the state of Israel as you are. You always have a home here, and I thank you so much for always being willing to give me time. Thank you, Izzy, very, very much.
Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure being with you again.
Thank you. And those were the thoughts of Ralph Seliger, editor of Israel Horizons, and Izzy Leibler, who writes a column for the Jerusalem Post. I hope you enjoyed hearing them. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to the ideas expressed by Ralph or Izzy. And if you want to be in touch with them, you can do so by emailing me. I will pass your emails on to them. I look forward to hearing from you this week. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.